by me not hiding it from the world and trying to fake good and trying to present this air of like this perfect person, I can help people hopefully through what they're going through and give them a bit of perspective.
What made you write this book at this time?
I think, it's really a reluctant memoir, and what I wanted to do was qualify these life lessons I had learned through stories from my life. And so suddenly, when I was writing the book proposal, I was like, oh God, like, is this a memoir? Because if so, it gives me the douche shivers. Like, who does that? Who does that at 35? But I I, I also knew that my life had hit this sort of series of inflection points, and the last one in my early 30s had felt so impactful. And I wanted to speak from this sort of fresh place, having just come out of it, instead of where we see a lot of memoirs, which are at, 50, 60, 70, someone who has sort of summited the mountain. I wanted to give sort of my perspective from halfway up.
Well, let's take things back towards the beginning. You started out acting at quite a young age. I'm curious, how young were you at the time and what drew you in?
I was 8 years old, and I think I love when Howard Stern talks about the fact that he got into the reason he got into being on radio was because his father was an audio engineer. Like growing up with a single mom, only child, we spent most of our days watching movies. We'd sneak into musicals in New York City because we didn't have money to buy the tickets. So during intermission, they'd open the doors and let people go outside to smoke. And then we would just sort of come in for the second act. So I knew that performing had value in my home. And then when I would see my mom at different functions, be it a dinner or something that was kind of more professional, she would take over the room in an instant. There was power to that. And there's very few things that a child can summon that puts them on the same level as a grown up at a young age. And acting and comedy is one of them.
You made that comparison there to Howard Stern and his father. You mentioned quickly there that, you never knew your father growing up. You grew up with a single mom. I'm curious, was part of, being on TV and being in front of people kind of a way for you to get attention you might not have gotten not having a dad growing up?
I don't know. I don't ever remember wanting attention, to be honest. If anything, I wanted to be thought of as good because I grew up so overweight that I felt like I walked into every situation at a disadvantage. And so I really wanted to be thought of as, it's sort of been my a little bit of sort of a phantom or a menacing thing in my life was this idea of perpetually feeling different. So I didn't have a dad. I wasn't into sports. We were like the weirdo musical theater family, and I was chubby. So I just felt like I was just so terminally unique, and I never wanted to be special. I just wanted to be like everyone else. So it felt like me performing, me having value in this thing, put me at the same level as everyone else. And I think that's what I was looking for more than, look over here and how great I am. But I heard it said the other day, and I think I fall victim to it too, which is if you treat me special, I feel normal. And if you treat me normal, I feel like there's something wrong with me.
Got it. I hear you. So you mentioned there a couple times, the weight being a thing for you at a young age. You're overweight and you ended up getting up to, I think at your heaviest, 297 pounds. Was it in the early days when you were acting, were you already heavy at that time, or was that something that came on like throughout your teens?
I was an overweight kid growing up, but, in New York City, like I would walk at 11, 12 years old to school and you pop into a bodega and buy like a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich for breakfast with like something called a quarter water, which was basically just sugar and red dye and water. And it was a quarter and like a bag of chips. And that was just breakfast. And then a slice of pizza with friends at lunch and who knows what was for dinner. But so I was always the chubby kid, and my mom had her own struggles with weight and whatnot. So I just kind of felt like we were the chubby family. But then eventually, as I got older, as I had more access to eating the way I wanted to, and also being on sets and having great snack tables where everything was free, which took me a long time to be like, I can't believe this is part of the deal. Like, screw the residuals. Like, how about all these free granola bars? So I think like for all those reasons, that's why I. By the time I was 16, I probably put on 100 pounds between 13 and 16.
And as somebody, being in the spotlight, being in front of the camera, how did being overweight, I mean, there's obviously a lot of kids that are overweight, but not necessarily doing what you're doing. How did that impact, the opportunities you had to be an actor?
Well, I think like when I started acting, people would look at me and say, "Oh, you're funny and you want to be an actor." Or I'm sorry, they would say, "Oh, you're chubby and you want to be an actor. I hope you're funny." And then they would immediately compare me to John Candy or Belushi or Chris Farley. And they weren't comparing my talent to theirs because they're geniuses, and to have 1/10 of what they had would be a dream. What they were comparing me to was their girth and this idea of like there's not really a lane for you unless you want to be this, but this is great. And I started to notice that there was like a Pavlovian response in people when they would see like it was like the reaction to their favorite candy bar. Like a chubby funny guy was like, "Oh, I know what this is. I love what this is." So it certainly made clear a path, but you were sort of relegated to two roles at that time, which was like the bully or the best friend. There wasn't Paul Hauser or Seth Rogen or Jonah Hill or like someone like Judd Apatow giving great roles to non-traditional leading men. It was it was very limiting, and so it was certainly like these golden handcuffs that if you didn't have an issue with the parts you were playing, there was definitely opportunity. But if you wanted anything more than that, you were out of luck.
And being overweight was obviously something you're aware of as you're going through being a kid. And you talk about in the book how trying to lose that weight and diet was part of your story at that time. You mentioned at 15, you went on the keto diet. This is all the way back in the early 2000s before, people are talking about that kind of diet. So, talk about some of the things you tried along the path to lose the weight, and did any of them really work for you?
Yeah, I tried. I mean, I keto early on was known as the Atkins diet, and it was started by Dr. Atkins, who basically got a bad rap because I mean, if only he could see now. He's been passed away, but I think like in the early aughts in the '90s and '80s when Atkins was super popular, people were like, "You can't eat bacon, you can't have a cheeseburger, and just cut out white flour and carbs." And while keto is certainly they're not, as far as I know, sort of perpetuating lots of fried, crazy, foods. It was very similar. It was like if you eat less than 20 grams of carbohydrate a day, your body will go into a state of ketosis, and you will start, your body will operate on fats instead of sugar. So I tried that and it would always work great. When you're that size, your body wants to let go of the weight. So, if I was strict in 3 days, I would lose 10, 12, 15 pounds sometimes. But inevitably, it was unsustainable and I would just go crashing back with all sort of like the subsequent self loathing and frustration that comes with um, trying and failing that much.
Well, let's talk about the point when things finally did work for you. You ended up losing 127 pounds. I think this was in your late teens.
Yeah.
What did you do, and what was different about your mentality at that time?
I think I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And whenever someone asks me for any advice about losing weight, I know they want some secret or a hack, and I want to give it to them because I want one. And I don't want to just meet them with the age old trope of, or it's not a trope, it's sort of the age old truth of, for me, what worked was eating a bit less and working out a little bit more. Um, but that's how I did it. So I always try to tell people if you're sick and tired, if you are at a bottom, if you are just so emotionally over it, I'm sorry you're going through that because I know how painful that can be. But I'm also excited for you because it's a great place to start. And that's where I was. I've never learned anything on a good day. Pain has been the great motivator in my life. And so I just knew that I had been self-limiting myself already at 17, 18 years old, where I mean, I was on television, so there were certainly opportunities to go to parties or to be wonderfully young and sowing my wild oats and maybe even go on a date. But I didn't allow myself any of that because I just was painfully uncomfortable. And it's not a grand sort of declaration about size and whatnot, because I certainly know plenty of people who I know growing up, I'd watch other kids who had some weight on them rip their shirt off and dive into the pool and not think twice. And I was like, oh, these people are superheroes. Like, wow, like to be that confident, I dream of that. Just my story in particular was one of that being that heavy was very uncomfortable for me, both physically and emotionally. So, yeah, I think I was utterly over it. I knew that if I'd be losing out on moments in life because I was holding myself back as a result of it. And I just decided that I was going to have to learn to live to fight another day. And so if there were days where I messed up and had some ice cream or what have you, it was like I couldn't just throw it all away and tailspin. I would just have to wake up the next morning and try to do better.
What did that feel like for you as somebody that had, basically only known what it felt like to carry that amount of weight throughout childhood? You're in your late teens at this point and you're not just shedding 20 pounds. This is over 100 pounds. So what did that do? You mentioned confidence before, these kids that, have the confidence when they still have the weight. How did that change your confidence and your mentality, with this new body of yours?
Well, it was all aesthetic, right? So I certainly did have more confidence, but a lot of it wasn't earned. It was a lot of confidence based on vanity, confidence based on my looks, confidence based on your reaction. Wow, the willpower it took. Wow, you're so impressive to have been able to do something that's evaded, so many people. And so it was tenuous. It was like, obviously, just I was in certain ways physically walking around with my chest out a little bit more, maybe not trying to close myself off from the world. But it also was sort of this false sense of like, of fake it till you make it. Like I thought that everything was going to be perfect now. And so I should act as as though it was. When the reality was, even when I lost weight, I still had so much more work and growing to do.
I could see how that could be even discouraging, thinking that this is your golden ticket to finally feeling good in your own skin and then getting there and then feeling like, I'm still the same guy inside and I still have the same problems.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, and at every turn, whether it was dealing with the food stuff or eventually drugs and alcohol, I think like the thing that has always been my true north, and whether it's a good thing that brings me to it or something incredibly challenging, is like, I'm bottomless. Nothing in this material world will fill me up. And if I'm going for something like that, I'm putting the cart before the horse. Like it's always going to have to come from within. Otherwise, I just know that its effects will wear off. I've had, there have been so many moments where losing weight or a drink or a drug or a girl thinking I'm attractive or booking some big job, like where I'm in the middle of that feeling and I'm just like, oh, if only I could figure out a way to bottle this forever. But sometimes quickly, sometimes, slowly, it all dissipates and I'm left with me. And so, but thankfully I know that today.
Well, you were in a really unique position when you lost the weight. You were, on a popular TV show, so people are seeing your transition publicly. So talk about what
Yes.
that was like. How did people, obviously this is TV, and you're not, seeing all the reactions like YouTube where people can comment right underneath and you can get a lot more feedback. But when you're out and about, how are people responding to this new Josh?
I mean, for the most part, it was fabulous. There were so many people who just, I would look for people I hadn't seen in many years to kind of show them this new guy. And it's just so intoxicating. It's so exciting when you're on this path and people are impressed by you. And in my mind, I think I just was sort of like, wow, like you did it. You got in right at the buzzer, and now you can have a proper college life, and the rest of your life as a thin person, like Yeah, middle school, elementary school, most of high school, not so bueno. But like, who cares about that? You have an opportunity. So that part of it was so exciting. Wearing clothes that I'd never, just shopping at normal stores instead of like the big and tall store at the mall. And all of that was fabulous. Not needing, to take an airplane seatbelt and put it at its last rung. Not being terrified of the doctor because I know they're going to give me that long talk about how I really have to start getting responsible about, my physical health. So in that way, it was fabulous. But then there was also this other side of it too, where I find that people tend to marry to themselves to you when they first fall. They marry themselves to the image they have of you when they first fall in love with you. And for me, that was this 14-year-old chubby kid. And in theory, I sort of took away that guy from them. I took that person away, a person that they loved. And a lot of people were resentful about that and would say things like, you were funnier when you were fat, or stop trying so hard. Or maybe they just felt like when I was bigger, I wasn't threatening to them, that they could watch me without feeling less than, because God knows I'll watch, plenty of male leads in movies and TV and think like, I got to start dieting harder. Like, who has a six pack like that? Who's like a lawyer on some procedural. But inevitably, I think navigating both sides of that was sort of challenging.
And do you feel like somebody that has been, so far to one side dealing with obesity for such a period of time, and now you've lost the weight and you've been able to maintain it and live, basically half your life with this new body, do you feel you have this extra layer of empathy and compassion for people that are struggling to lose weight and that is a goal of theirs?
Absolutely. And weight is one of those things where you can't fake good, right? And I don't want to talk about it. I'm sharing my own experience because I think like what didn't exist when I was dealing with my weight stuff is so prevalent now, which is body positivity. And I'll walk in the mall and with my son and I'll see these mannequins or these big print advertisements in windows, and it's embracing people of all sizes and shapes, and it's fabulous that we can like redefine what's beautiful, and what's like acceptable in that way, or in sort of like print modeling and whatnot. I think it's great. I think it's important that people feel represented. But that just didn't exist when I was going through it. And so I always want to tell people like, as I said, there are people who are bigger, and the reason they are is it's a manifestation of their love of food, and they enjoy being able to indulge and to be free and unencumbered, and there's nothing negative about it, and I think that's awesome. And I was in a different category where my size was a manifestation of a lot of discomfort that I was going through. And it walks in the room before you do, right? Like you can't hide it when that's the case. So me being that size said a lot about what I was going through. So I always want to try to be empathic, and I just it's sort of like a metaphor for this whole book is me saying like, I know what you're going through. You saw me go through it. You don't have to just believe it. It's not like a lot of self-help books where you're like, this guy sounds like maybe he understands, or this woman, she says she went through something similar. Like, I hope I've qualified it to you guys what I've been through, which is why I wrote this, because that's what felt unique about my position.
Well, let's continue the story. We've gotten up into the point where, you've lost the weight, you're in this new body. You quickly touched on the drugs there. The way
Yeah.
I understand it from reading the book is that you use this food as a coping mechanism because of deeper things going on. You finally hit rock bottom, lose weight, and then drugs become kind of the fill in for that. Does that feel right for you?
Yes, drugs were so much more efficacious. I like to say that I traded a Prius for a Ferrari with no brakes. Like, I, I was never trying to kill myself. I was always trying to kill the part of me that wouldn't let me live. That committee that woke up a few minutes before I did every morning that would tell me all the reasons why I wasn't enough or why things wouldn't work out. And food worked beautifully until it didn't, right? There was diminishing returns, and then when I found drugs and alcohol, there were so much less calories and such a strong effect. So I leaned in fully, and I also felt terribly typical, which as I said before, was what I'd been seeking my whole life. Like, oh, this is what most 18-year-old kids do. They act like knuckleheads. They're unreliable, and they act in a irresponsible way, and this seems like the perfect way to do so. So it was a terrible recipe for disaster for someone like me, and I'm just so grateful there weren't camera phones back then, or I probably would have been on TMZ more than I'd like to admit. But yeah, it brought me to my knees rather quickly.
And you got into it pretty deep. You talk about in the book how you'd go to these gatherings with other people that were into doing drugs, and basically you guys would just get drugged out and kind of enjoy the bliss of disconnecting from reality together.
Hmm.
And you, I think it was about a 4-year period that you were involved in drugs. And a lot of people, get involved in that, and it just keeps going down and down and down and getting worse and worse. For you, you're able to, turn things around and have this whole second life and do so many amazing things. So let's talk about the point on that drug journey when things change for you, when something clicked and you're able to pull out of that routine and get help.
I think much like I said about the food, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I knew that my way wasn't working for me. I, I, I was lucky enough to find help through 12 step, and I've heard it said before at a 12 step meeting, like your best thinking got you a front row seat right here. So, like, you doing it your own way, you thinking that you can navigate life better than anyone else got you here. So, maybe you should start taking some suggestions. And I have found that to be really true. And it's made me good at embracing other people's way. And so now I'm attracted to people who have the life that I want. And I always say if you're in a relationship, don't ask your single friends for advice. Um, I remember early on dating my wife where we'd have just like a natural conflict as people do, and I would talk to my single friends who would say, "Man, you got to lay down the law. You really have to like draw a line and stick to your guns here." And then my married friends would be like, "Did you try apologizing? Like, maybe just shut up and don't make things worse, and this will pass." So I just, I was lucky that I could tell that whether it was food or drugs and alcohol or prestige or whatever it was not enough. I talk about in the book, I somehow, in the midst of my, sort of drug escapades, booked one of the greatest sort of jobs I've ever had, which was this movie called The Whackness. And it was about, 1994 in New York. I played a drug dealer who gets therapy from Sir Ben Kingsley, who's my favorite actor. And it was a thing I dreamt of my whole life because I never wanted to be the chubby actor. And I surely didn't want to be the child actor. I just wanted to be an actor. And here I was getting to operate on this like really high level, and it goes to the Sundance Film Festival, which was also another dream of mine. And all these impressive people are in the audience, and Quentin Tarantino comes to the screening, and I'm like, oh my God, it's here. I have arrived. And I just remember waking up the next morning and the reviews are coming in and they're fabulous, and just thinking, I got to get out of here. And people screamed at me. They said, "What are you doing? Like, no one gets to do this. No one gets to have a hit movie at this festival. Like, it may never happen again." But it seemed as though as soon as I was sort of given entrance to the club, I didn't want to be a member anymore. And it just solidified this idea of like, oh no, Josh, you're bottomless. No matter how much good you can accrue from life, it will never be enough. And I got sober 2 weeks later.
You mentioned there the bottomless part and never being enough. But what do you think it was being at Sundance and getting all the attention on you and all the applause? If you go a little bit deeper on that, what do you think was under that where you had to flee and go back home?
I think it was just an inability to accept life on life's terms, good or bad. And I, food and drugs and alcohol, like I knew that it wasn't lost on me even when I was when I was totally deluding myself or in the midst of or in the depths of my using. You still know on some level you're like, oh, this isn't kale, right? Like this isn't good for me. But then I thought doing something that people love and crossing this finish line I had set for myself, well, that's pure good, isn't it? Like, isn't that just what life's about is setting a goal and meeting it and having people who are respectable respect you. But again, it was like I was I was not enough. Um, my coding was just in conflict with the world. My ones and zeros just I couldn't subscribe to the social contract. And so I knew that whether life got incredibly good or incredibly bad, I was going to be uncomfortable. And it drove me to finally try it another way. Yeah.
When you're in the depths of using the drugs and alcohol, did you feel like this is just a temporary thing? I can see that this is just a phase I'm in. I have a way out. Or did it feel like, or did you even think that deeply about it?
I think for a lot of it, to be quite honest, because I'd always wanted to be different and I'd always looked up to Anthony Bourdain and Jean-Michel Basquiat and Hunter S. Thompson and, William S. Burroughs, like all of these like beatniks. Like I grew up in New York, the musical theater kid surrounded by like athletes and finance people and Jewish family members who all told me like, it's cute you're doing this thing, but you should really try to do law school at night. And so again, I felt like drugs and alcohol, that's what the people I looked up to did. And I was of that class. So for a lot of it, I just assumed like, yeah, I'm gonna have kids and a family one day, but I'm always gonna smoke pot and I'm always gonna get a little high and I'll just balance it. And then after a while, when enough bad moments had happened, when I got into trouble too many times, it just started to become clear that I didn't have control over this thing. And that's when I knew I needed to make a change.
Was there a certain climax point or somebody in your life that was able to get through to you at a certain point where they said, Josh, like you've been doing these drugs for a number of years. You're going downhill and we want you to get help. Like, what was the catalyst for you to go to AA and get help?
Well, I think there were just so many moments, like, and I think these moments, people that are good influences on your life, like they will plant a truth tree in your brain, and you don't know how long it will take for that tree to turn into like a majestic forest of truth, right? And so that was what it was for me. I was ruining relationships. I was setting my life on fire. I was running from the police. I was breaking my mom's heart on a daily basis, and that was all weighing on me. And then slowly but surely, having that moment at Sundance was one thing, which was, wow, no matter what side of the coin, neither of these things can make me happy and feel okay. And then I don't know why, but I remember this having a very a big impact on me, which was the day before I left Sundance, I'm sitting there and everyone tells me that Peter Travers wants to interview me for the movie. And if for anyone who doesn't know, he's a storied, famous reviewer for Rolling Stone magazine and incredibly smart, so good at what he does. And if he likes your movie, it's very powerful. So, of course, I say, yeah, I would love to sit down and chat with him. And we're sitting there and 10 minutes goes by, and I remember a producer stopped the interview halfway through and says, Peter, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Heath Ledger just died. And I remember this collective gasp goes across the room, and people are starting to tear up, and publicists are like immediately running and messaging people and trying to get more information. And I think I told myself the great lie that so many people tell themselves in their addiction, which is, oh, I'm only hurting myself. But here was this guy who like someone I so looked up to that I didn't know personally, and that most of the people in that room probably had never even met, and yet it had such an effect on all of us. And I remember a week before that, Brad Renfro, who was another great actor who was around that age, had died from an overdose. And I think, both of those guys who I looked up to and were only, 6 years older than me, the fact that they couldn't make it through, I think made it that more real for me that like I was really skating on thin ice.
The seeds were planted.
Yes.
So what was it, another couple of years before you got sober?
No, a week or
Oh,
like
only a
two
week.
weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you get sober, and obviously this is a huge thing for you because you're not now spending time doing drugs with these people and wasting, quote unquote, a lot of your time. But the way I see it, you're using this as a coping mechanism for something deeper. We talked about the food being that and then the drugs. So when you decide to pull that away, what fills that void at that point?
Well, it's a God-shaped hole, right? Like whatever your thing is, whether it's you spiritual or not, it was really about once all of that was removed. It was about looking at these negative patterns that I'd had in my life, these defense mechanisms that I had accrued to deal with the fact that I was a powerless kid who was, you know, dealing with not having a dad or with feeling terminally unique because I was overweight and whatnot, and in this very odd. It's hard enough to be different in high school, but when your high school is in front of a couple million people every week, it can present some other challenges. So it was about looking at these negative patterns and these defense mechanisms I had accrued that I thought were helping me. And maybe in the moment they were, but now as a sober guy, that was no longer, I was living an old story. So I had to rid myself of that. And then I also had to learn, how to get self esteem by doing esteemable acts and to allow a good life to be the result of good living instead of me thinking that I had to go wrestle, prestige or people liking me from life. Go get mine, hustle, hustle, hustle. What we're bombarded with on Instagram every day. And instead, learning how to be of service to people like my mom and friends and family, and then inevitably being of service of my employer, and being a good employee and showing up on time and being accountable. And then, the highest order, which was doing good deeds and not getting caught doing it, like do something nice for someone and don't get caught. So, it was a multi tiered process, but it basically was softening and rearing and turning me into a good man, which I believe deep down I always was a good person because my mom created one, but it was sort of shadowed by these bad habits I'd picked up over the years to protect myself.
And now when you zoom back, you're 35, you don't have the bad habits, and you look at your life, do you feel like when you look at what you were doing there coping, was that all related to your dad and not having a connection to your dad? Or was that just one of many things?
I think one of many things, and I also had to learn how to forgive that kid. For so many years, I wanted to rewrite my origin story. I wanted to swear the world to secrecy. I looked at myself when I was overweight, and I was so frustrated with myself. Like, why did you do that to us? Like, why did you stretch out our skin and make us feel embarrassed and invite criticism? And why couldn't you have just controlled yourself? And I know it's like weird to talk about yourself in the third person like that, but for a long time, it truly felt like a different guy. And learning how to love that kid who was really just doing the best he could with what he had and had to deal with things that I don't have to deal with anymore. And like loving that kid, it sounds so damn corny, you know, um, embracing your inner child, but it's true. And I think part of that is why I wrote this book was being willing to share those struggles and being honest about what I went through in the hopes that that honesty can allow for other people to feel seen in their struggle.
That's a beautiful thing. It makes sense. I'm curious, writing this book and putting it all down on paper, how many of the stories you share in here are new to the public, or is this all stuff that's been, shared in bits and pieces over the years?
I think it's 90% new, to be honest. I think that I'm kind of that last generation of people where celebrity or public figures were kind of mysterious. Like they would come out of hiding every, you know, 18 months to promote some film, and then they would do talk shows and magazines, and you'd see them like nuts for like 6 weeks, and then they'd disappear again. But now everything is on the record, and people are in your face every moment of every day. And so I just assumed that I always had to gloss over any weakness. I had to, keep it from view. And then if it was about things that I couldn't deny, like being overweight, it was just better to make a joke and move on. And this is the first time that I've really been honest about a lot of the challenges I face.
You talk about how it is a relatively new world with, long form podcast interviews like this, where, we're just connecting for the first time. We don't know where this conversation is going to go. And back in the day, it would have been, lining up your 5-minute spiels on different talk shows. And like
Right.
it was all under control and it was all tightly reined in. It's a beautiful thing, but it's naturally going to share a lot more vulnerability with the new way media is. And I think that's only gonna help, connect you with the people that admire your work and have been following you all along.
Yeah, I think this is why you guys are killing talk shows, right? Like, I like listening, or I enjoy watching old episodes of the Dick Cavett show on YouTube because there was like kind of this, as much as you could allow for in late night back then. He didn't, to, from what I remember, he didn't really have a desk. There was like everybody kind of sat down and kind of rapped a little bit. I watched this great segment where Dick Cavett's interviewing this incredibly famous piano player named Oscar Peterson. And are you Canadian?
I am.
So, and Oscar Peterson's a great Canadian treasure from Montreal, and it's this 9 minute segment, and Dick Cavett's just asking him, and they're sitting at the piano, and he's like, "Now play something in the vein of Art Tatum or of Count Basie or all these different sort of piano styles." And that segment would never make it today. It would be 3 minutes, and it would be like, "Can you play something from Katy Perry's songbook and also Ariana Grande?" I don't know, you know what I mean? But it just there was much like this format. There was air to it. There was a relaxation. There was an honesty. There wasn't a desire to sort of cover up any misstep and whatnot. And I think that's why. I mean, I'm obsessed with podcasts. I'm the weirdo who listens to them while I work out. So
Well, how does it feel for you now that, the book I have a preview copy of the book. It's not actually out in the world yet,
yeah.
but it's coming. We're getting close to the release. How does that feel for you being so vulnerable and putting everything out there? I can imagine it's got to be scary in a way, but also freeing. Like I'm no longer trying to hide these different aspects of myself.
I think that's a great point. You're right. It's in facing that thing. At every point when I face whatever that scary thing is in the closet that I've locked away forever, when I really stand toe to toe with it and say like, "Hey man, it's gonna have to be you or me," because I can't go on trying to like balance you in the closet, trying to break the door down while I act like nothing's happening. So I think you're absolutely right. There's something so freeing about sort of putting your life out there. And I could only do it if knowing that I'm proud of where I am today. And also that by me not hiding it from the world and trying to fake good and trying to present this air of like this perfect person, I can help people hopefully through what they're going through and give them a bit of perspective. And I think that's kind of all that life's about.
When this opportunity to write a book like this came to you, was it an instant yes, or was there a lot of thinking involved in discussions with your wife, or how easy did this come to you?
No, I never wanted to write a book. I'd written some screenplays and whatnot before, but This is like one of those rare instances, I think, where an agent tells you to do something and it actually turns out to be exactly what you needed in that moment. And I just was really lucky that some of the agents who worked at my agency for movies and television and social media, they have this prolific book department. And I think obviously they knew that I had a big following, and so that would help to sell the book. And it wasn't just purely based on that kid has a story. But when we had the initial conversations, and then they said, why don't you just send us a couple pages of something you think you'd like the book to look like? And I just kind of wrote out freehand, 5 pages of some inner monologue. And at every turn, I just got a lot of support. And so it felt like the right thing. And I didn't want the book to be merch. A lot of people, they get to a certain level and they just write a book because that's what you do. Like, I wanted the book initially, I didn't even want to be on the cover of the book because I wanted it to live on its own merits. And then people were like, cool, do you want to sell books? Because if you want to sell them, maybe you want to have your face on it. So, for better or for worse, but I didn't want the book to be popular because I gave some hot goss from the set of Drake and Josh or what have you. I wanted it to be good, and if people like it because of that, great. And if not, well, at least I know I tried.
Did you find the writing process itself to be therapeutic? I mean, you probably went back and relived a lot of memories maybe you haven't even touched on in however many years. What was it like just getting it down on paper for you?
You're right. It was pretty therapeutic, and it forced me to look at my life in certain ways that I don't think I would have naturally looked at. It allowed me to also be the writer, and I'm going to butcher this, and my editor's always sort of forcing this, drilling this into my head, but this idea of like the writer at desk. No, I'm killing this. But it basically this idea of like it's one thing for me to convey what I was going through during the time I was going through it. And then it also helps to give a bit to editorialize it slightly and say, now looking back and revisiting this, what's my take on it now? And I think that was really helpful because I'm not sure we always do that. We sometimes are so connected to what happened when we were a kid that we relive it through the lens of that child. Or conversely, I think we lose all of that because we've cut ourselves off and we only look at life through the eyes of an adult. But I think there is a balance of that because trauma, real or perceived, still has an effect. And so, obviously, as a grown up, I look back at what I was going through as a kid, and some of the things I feel totally, sympathetic, and other things I go like, well, maybe I was overblowing it in my head a little bit of how I didn't have to be that uncomfortable. But of course, I couldn't have known that then because I was 12. I wasn't equipped with what I have now as a 35-year-old man. I didn't have the tools to be able to sort of disseminate that information.
Let's come back to your story, the part where you're at Sundance, you get all these accolades, you decide to leave, and then shortly after that you get sober. What happened next with the career? You're sober and this is a big step for you and it really changes your whole reality.
Yeah.
What happened next with the acting gigs?
So I spent the next 5 years working in a limited capacity. I got this really big movie that I completely face planted called Red Dawn, where I talk about it in the film, or I'm sorry, in the book, where I finally sort of got invited to be the guy I always thought I wanted to be, which was this badass action star who had a low BMI and a high amount of testosterone. And unfortunately, I just was not able to live up to the task and completely sort of self sabotaged by basically throwing away everything that had worked for me my whole life and by presenting myself or pretending to be what I thought was like a tough alpha male. And it fell short. Someone recently wrote a tweet about Red Dawn saying it's like maybe one of the worst performances ever recorded on film. And I would not disagree. But it didn't stop me. It just, put me in a position where I now had to fight for everything that came next. It didn't matter what sort of all the goodwill I had accrued in my career over the years, I had to, find what my next gig was going to be. And that allowed for, a challenging couple of years where I certainly worked, but doing a lot of things, in some cases just to be able to pay my rent, and other times just taking risks on things that didn't quite pan out because I knew I needed to take a big swing because I had sort of I was sort of starting beginning again.
You talk about that role as a superhero and how it was a total flop. It reminds me of something you talk about in the book, which I really liked. I think it was a friend of yours that had said, "Trying too hard is killing you." Basically, I'm totally paraphrasing, but the
Right.
fact is, when we try and grip too tightly on something we're doing that's a creative process, and I can relate to that with the show. If I'm, you know, spend all this time preparing and then I try and um, you know, dictate the whole thing and how it's going to go, that's going to cause it naturally to lose some of its beauty and connection. So I think
Yes.
there's an important point for people where this isn't saying be lazy or don't put in the work, but to hold loosely onto that creative thing you're trying to do and not try too hard. And you might find that, your results exponentially go up.
I think that's a great point. I love when you hear about like the great jujitsu masters, and I think it was like maybe it was one of the Gracies, or I'm not sure whom, but they just said that he was so in such a flow state that he would literally sometimes nap until minutes before a match. And it's just like, because Brazilian Jiu Jitsu itself is such a chess match, right? And you're being reactive to what's getting sort of presented to you, but to be that comfortable in your basics and to know that you are utterly prepared, and now the only way to really put it into action is to be able to react to what's coming at you. I mean, that's why I think those performances that we're so attracted to when you watch a master like Pacino or Michael Shannon and all these great actors is like their fundamentals are so strong that they truly can be free in the moment. And when you're watching someone and it doesn't seem pre-planned and it feels truly reactive, it's like, it's what turns me on as a viewer.
And for somebody who is still currently acting, Turner and Hooch is out, and I think you've put one season out of that show. Congrats on
Hmm.
that. Is this something you have to come back to yourself and remind yourself as you're acting these days, or did it become second nature over time?
Well, a few years ago, I went back to acting class because I knew I compared myself to a fighter with a 2020 record. It didn't, it's like, I would say, like, but guys, like, I once fought at Madison Square Garden, and people would say, like, well, who gives a shit? Like, now you're fighting in the ballroom of a Best Western. Like, I just knew that there were things that were unaddressed. I had blind spots in my acting ability that if left unaddressed, if I allowed my ego or my fear of seeing the ways in which I needed to do better, if I let that dictate my life and I didn't uncover those things and really face them, that I would never live up to the potential that I was hoping for, and probably just eventually stop working. So now I think I force myself to do the work, and I know how to do it because I'm constantly in class. I have acting classes Thursday, and then I'll go and work on something for the next. I'm starting this movie next week, and I'll do that for 4 or 5 weeks, and then I'll be back in class. And I won't allow myself to believe that I was good once, so I must be able to be good now. It's got to be a workout. It's got to be a practice. Yesterday's dinner won't keep you fed. So I think if I'm willing to face that and subscribe to that David Mamet quote, which is the easily shamed will never learn, I have to remember that sometimes to be great, it will require me to feel utterly embarrassed when I try something and feel like a dope. But I have to do that to know that way doesn't work for to reveal the right way.
Let's jump back a little bit in your story to the point where you discover this app Vine. And it's early on, and you're in unique you're in a unique position because you are a public figure and this is all new and we don't know how things are going to pan out with social media at the time. And is this a mistake, being vulnerable and putting yourself out there because you're a polished actor? So let's talk about what point in the journey that was and how that was such a moment of flow for you and your career and a pivotal moment.
I think in discovering Vine, what was revealed to me in finding a small audience on it was that it was powerful to be able to connect directly with an audience when I'd been so at the mercy of gatekeepers my whole life and so many things out of my control, be it casting directors, producers, directors, and even Red Dawn is a great example, right? Because the movie is a fine movie, even though I'm hot dumpster trash in it. Um, but like that was a film that, let's say it was great, and I was great in it. It's still, after we made it, basically the movie studio that financed it went out of business, and we had to wait 3 years for it to come out. So there's so much that you are not in charge of as an actor, and it can at times become maddening because you can't. It's not like sales where you can create an income for yourself. But in getting the audience through Vine and then eventually Instagram, YouTube, and social media, it was immediate. And I was rewarded for the time that I put in by people wanting to advertise on a video that I had made, or people wanting to engage me for something because they wanted to buy the eyeballs that I had on my, on the social stuff that I was doing. So it freed me in a way that I was never expecting. And it was nerve wracking initially and even today, but so much more so then. It felt like there was like this very big distinction between people who did social media and people who were in traditional TV and movies. And, you use social media as a springboard into movies and TV, not the other way around. But for me, as the first time I made a check from social media, I was like, oh, it's not lost on me the significance of the freedom that this money is going to buy me. And it seems like if I continue along this path, more opportunity will reveal itself. So I went towards what was working instead of what my ego was telling me I should be doing.
Let's talk more about that freedom because this is where I wanted to go next. You mentioned getting the check and the freedom that gave you. As an actor, there's got to be so much pressure, when you go to an audition and you're relying on that as a source of your income and a source of your work. I can only imagine, when you started to diversify and you had, you're making money through sponsorship on these other social media platforms, how that must have totally changed your confidence when you would go into an audition because you really didn't need them. This was your love. You didn't want to give up acting, but you also didn't need it like you needed it before.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make, and I think for me it was specific to when I did that show Turner and Hooch that you mentioned. I sort of was the first one to be cast, and so then I had the rare opportunity of reading with some actors for other roles in the show, and I basically was just there to see if we had chemistry and to sort of help with the audition. Plus, it's always great when you can read against the actor who's going to play the role as opposed to a casting director. And what was so crazy was, if there were 9 people reading for a role, 3 of them would be not right. And 3 of them, or I should say, 3 of them would be like less than prepared and maybe not great. 3 people would be totally great, just clearly not right, maybe from a look standpoint or just like an energy. And then you'd be left with 3 people who could all do the job. And then it becomes like literally flavors. Like, oh, well, this person, like, I like their look as it fits into the totality of the project and the other cast members. And it's like to be on the other side of things, which I so rarely am, you go like, oh my God, like that's even more maddening. That literally for most parts, it's not about being totally perfect. It's about being right. And you can't control that. You could control how well you do at the audition. But even if you crush it, there's a good chance there will still be 2 other people that are just as right for the part as you. And my acting teacher reminds me of that all the time. She's like, remember, like, this isn't Hamlet, right? It's NCIS Cleveland or whatever. It's CSI Ontario. Like you can't like it's just there's more than one person for this part. So I think being able, to your point, to walk into an audition and knowing my rent is paid for, my life is full, I have a wife and a kid. To do this part will only slightly improve my life. And to not do it really, other than a couple minutes of feeling rejected when I get the news that it's not going my way, won't affect it negatively. That's a superpower. That's an energy because nobody wants to be with someone who just got broken up with.
Makes sense. And to further extrapolate on that point of, somebody can be perfect for the part and not get it. As human beings, being in that position of, say, not getting a part, we're going to naturally start thinking about all the things we did wrong and why it's on us. But I think if we extrapolate that point to life in general, we can say, like, that person that was honking at me in traffic, maybe they have their own reason and it's not to do with you. Or,
Sure.
even your partner in life, if all of a sudden, you guys are brushing each other the wrong way at breakfast, maybe they had a bad sleep or maybe there's something else going on that they're working through.
Mm,
And to take that and use that in life in general, that we don't always know the full picture and maybe it isn't us. And not to totally deflect the blame. Sometimes it is us, but
sure.
sometimes it might not be.
Absolutely. It's so frustrating how not personal most things are.
Let's talk about becoming a dad. You get into this in the book and how you and your wife did a beautiful thing, which I also did with my wife on our first child, where we didn't find out the sex of the baby till she was born. In my case, in your case, he. Explain in the book how during that 9 months you're picturing this child, and at that time you were hoping it was a girl because you were worried about being a dad to a boy. I think it ties into, not having a dad as a kid, but I'd love for you to talk more about that and the feelings you had at that time.
Yeah, I think I assumed that with the amount of musical theater I had done, that there was just no chance that I would have a boy. And then, of course, when my son was born, I said, of course. It felt like this cosmic comeuppance because, my dad died when I was 26. He was in his 80s. I never knew him, but I knew that he had passed away. And so I'm never going to get an amends from my dad, and that's okay. But sometimes we don't get the amends we deserve. But the way we give the amends to ourselves is by correcting trauma and not passing it on to the next generation. So for my son, I wanted to be the dad for him that I always wanted my dad to be for me. And there was, this moment where I just loved all the mundane tasks, be it the sleepless nights. My wife would laugh at me saying that because she's like, I'm pretty sure you slept okay. She's like, I'm not sure I got a lot of sleep, um, but from the diapers changing too, I would walk him for hours in his stroller just to give his mom a few hours of a break, or when he had an ear infection and I went to the pharmacy and said, picking up a prescription for Max Peck, this idea that a kid had his own, pharmacy account. I and I just remembered that my dad missed all this, and it allowed me to feel some empathy for him because he had a whole other family and a whole other life. Like I can't judge him. I don't know. Maybe there are more of me out there, or maybe it's just a guy who made a mistake, who was really afraid of shaking up this entire life and family structure that he had that existed far before my mom and I came into his life. I don't know. But it was enough for me to feel like I was sort of righting the wrongs of whatever I had experienced, and that helped me heal.
And how old's your son at this point?
He's 3 now.
What would you say is the greatest way that having a kid has changed, your whole perspective on the world and life?
It just allows you. It's this great tool in which that solidifies something I always have known, and I think we all know on a base level, which is like help your fellows boat to the other side and yours too will cross. Like if you get out of yourself, you're in service to others, you realize like if your base needs are taken care of and you've done the amount of work you have to do for that day, and you have food in your belly and you've had some rest, like for a guy like me, I can't go out seeking more fulfillment and pleasure. The only form it's going to come in is of being of service to someone who totally needs me, like my kid. And so it helps jolt me into the present. It helps me be more selfless, and it helps my priorities because like recently I had an opportunity to audition for a job that would require my wife and I and my son to move out of the country for 10 months a year, and it just didn't it wasn't realistic. But normally before Max I would lament about, is this the right thing? And now it's just so clearly like, no, that wouldn't be good for my son, so I'm not gonna do it. How old is your daughter?
My daughter is 2, and I
Oh,
actually have a son
awesome.
who's 2 months, so
You're in it.
I'm in full dad mode, and it's
Oh,
beautiful. I love it just like you.
congratulations. That's fabulous.
Thank you, and to you too. Do you guys know if you're gonna have more kids?
We want to. We certainly want to. So, and the best part of having kids is making them. So we'll get to work.
Nice. So, one thing that's so apparent, Josh, in talking to you here and reading your book is this drive to, you know, not let anything get in your way. You've lived life with so many ups and downs and pivots and doing different things, but from the outside looking at you, you're unstoppable. You're not going to let anything, slow you down or screw things up. And what I'm curious about is, to me, again, from reading the book and talking to you here, it seems like that stems from this love and want to take good care of your mother, which I think is just such a beautiful thing. So I'd love for you to talk more about that and how you allude to it a couple few times as I'm reading the book, how you had this, I felt like almost like a pressure to succeed because your mom had done so much for you, and she was a single mom, and she even picked up and moved from New York over to California and done so much for you. So I could see how that could be pressure that could be taken in a beautiful way, like you've done, or also it could make somebody crumble too. So I'd like for you to talk on that.
Certainly, I think that's a really astute observation. I mean, I think it was born out of feeling utterly powerless as a kid, and because I got into acting so young, when I went to like performing arts high school, and I was surrounded by kids who were on Broadway and on TV shows, and I'm like, oh, suddenly, like all my Jewish grandparents and relatives who were like, you should really be going to law school. This is no way to make a living. Suddenly, I was like, oh, they're not right. Like you can do it. Doesn't seem easy, and it certainly seems like a low percentage of success, but it's doable, and there are people doing it. And so it was at that age that I really doubled down on what I was doing, and it was young, 12 or 13, because I knew that I hated feeling powerless. I hated when watching my mom struggle. I hated when she would call me and into the living room and say like, honey, we have to pack up the apartment because in 2 weeks we're moving and I don't know where we're moving. um, those are all really hard things. And then I think you're right. There's just been an immense pressure to take care of my mom my whole life. And it's my pleasure, because you're right. I'm so much a product of the hard work and sacrifice she made. And, I don't know. I cannot, I think about it a lot. Like, there are moments now, and like knock wood, where I have like enough financial security from social media where I could easily take a year or two off from acting and just be like, enough. Like, how many auditions? Like, how many rejections do I have to face in my life? I've literally felt thousands. And maybe I could just take a break for a while and worry about making funny TikToks and hang out with my kid. And then the next audition comes in, and I just print the pages and I sit down and I start breaking them down. And I can't, I don't know what it is unless I'm a glutton for punishment, but I attribute it to like being a gambling addict in the book, where most of your life is going to be losses, but it's like those few wins that keep you going. Um, but I just, and it's not for lack of it. Of There have been so many moments where I've like literally, because I'm a sober guy, so I'll like go figure out where I can get like a pastry and a cigarette or something, like whatever, whatever can hurt myself in a not that bad way. and lamenting because of something I wanted so bad that didn't work out. And I feel all those things, and yet I always go on the next audition, and I don't know what it is. I think I'm just programmed that way after doing it for so long.
It must be so satisfying for you though to be at this point and be financially secure, and after the journey you and your mother have been on, to be able to provide and take good care of her.
It is. It's. I'm very proud of it.
So the title of the new book, Happy People Are Annoying. I'm curious, at this point in your life, again, the journey's been all over the place and you're in a really good spot, it seems. Do you feel you're at your happiest right now?
I think so, but I think like as I talk about in the book, I love this idea of the bad times are here to teach us, and the good times are to remind us what we're fighting for. Like, what I know for sure is that the good times are coming as sure as the bad times are coming, and they will sort of go back and forth in this messed up, weird ballet through all of eternity, because the universe demands balance. And, too much sunshine brings about a desert, as my friend says, which I love that quote. But it's just, yeah, it's so true. And I think that I'm more so at peace than ever at this idea of like, I can't have expectation because I never could have imagined my life to be what it is today. And so I just have to allow things to come as they will, and to not get too attached to the good or the bad times. I have a podcast now called Male Models, but I had one for many years called Curious, and I would interview these people. And I interviewed Neil Brennan, who was Dave Chappelle's writing partner and helped create the Chappelle Show. And I'll never forget what he said to me, which was, he said, "You'll probably get what you always wanted, just not in the way you expected it." And then he took a moment and said, "Actually, you'll probably get what you always wanted, but by the time you get it, you won't want it anymore." And I found that to be very true.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, Josh, I love the new book. I love the storytelling, the vulnerability, and the
Thank
lessons
you.
that, I gained, and I'm sure a lot of other people are going to gain from reading your story. So thank you for putting that out there. And thank you for coming on the show and just sharing a bit of your story. And I really enjoyed our conversation. And I hope people go out and get the book.
I love chatting with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Josh, again, thank you. And great connecting with you.
You too, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.